Ancient Egypt's master metalworkers achieved the impossible with simple tools. How did they forge objects of such stunning precision and beauty that they still baffle experts today? We are about to uncover the lost secrets of Egyptian metalworking, a journey that will reveal a forgotten science. You will learn how they transformed rock into divine artifacts and why some of their techniques remain a mystery. We will explore how they sourced metals rarer than gold and crafted weapons from fallen stars. What forgotten truth about human ingenuity are we only now beginning to grasp? Long before the pyramids, a quiet revolution began in the desert heat. The story of Egyptian metalworking starts not with fire, but with a simple, curious discovery. People of the Predynastic period, over 6,000 years ago, would occasionally find strange, heavy stones along the ground, stones with a dull, reddish glint. This was native copper, pure metal left behind by geological forces, and it was about to change everything. At first, they treated it like any other stone. They used harder rocks to painstakingly hammer these copper nuggets into simple, practical shapes. The earliest artifacts we have from this era are not swords or crowns, but small, personal items like beads and pins. You can almost picture someone spending hours, maybe even days, patiently pounding a lump of copper into a smooth, round bead to be worn as a simple ornament. This technique, known as cold hammering, was the very first tentative step away from a world built entirely of stone and bone, but the true breakthrough, the moment that truly set humanity on a new path, came with the discovery of fire. Imagine a campfire built over a certain type of colorful, heavy rock, not a pure copper nugget. After the fire died down, someone noticed a strange, shining pool of material that had never been there before, hardened in the ashes. This was the accidental birth of smelting. It was the realization that intense heat could unlock metal trapped inside ordinary-looking rock, a process far more powerful than just shaping found pieces. We have found evidence of this revolutionary practice at ancient settlements like Madi, a site near modern Cairo. Here, archaeologists uncovered the remains of simple clay furnaces and slag, the stony waste left over after smelting copper from its ore. This was no longer just shaping metal, it was creating it from stone, an act that must have seemed like pure magic. With smelting, the Egyptians gained access to a vastly greater supply of metal. They began to systematically mine copper ore from the rugged eastern desert and the Sinai Peninsula, regions that would become the kingdom's industrial heartland for millennia. This shift from simply using found objects to actively transforming one substance into another marked a fundamental change in human capability. It was the dawn of a new relationship with the natural world, one where humanity was no longer just a gatherer, but a creator. The ability to smelt copper did not just give them better tools, it ignited a spark of technological possibility that would eventually forge an empire. This newfound power to create metal from stone forged the very foundations of the state itself. Copper rapidly became the indispensable material of civilization, the lifeblood of both industry and empire. To understand ancient Egypt's ascent, you must follow the flow of copper. The pharaohs themselves understood this, establishing a royal monopoly over the distant mines in the Sinai and the eastern desert. Controlling the source of this metal was not just an economic advantage, it was the ultimate source of their authority. Without copper, there would be no pyramids, no grand temples, and no powerful army to defend the kingdom. This was the copper standard, a reality where political power was directly measured in tons of smelted ore. Consider the monumental task of building the Great Pyramid. The sheer scale of its construction is almost beyond comprehension, and it was achieved with tools made primarily from copper. Thousands of workers wielding copper chisels and saws quarried the massive limestone blocks. They used copper core drills to bore through granite, a stone harder than the metal itself. How did a soft metal like copper carve such immense structures? The answer lies in relentless force and constant replacement. A single quarrying site would have required tons of copper tools, with workers cycling through countless chisels that were blunted, resharpened, and eventually recycled. The pyramids, therefore, stand as a testament not only to human labor, but to an entire industrial economy dedicated to producing the metal that made them possible. This industrial might also forge the weapons that secured the kingdom. The Egyptian military, the instrument of pharaonic power, was armed with copper. Soldiers carried lethal daggers with razor-sharp edges and formidable axe heads mounted on wooden poles. These were not the weapons of a minor chiefdom, they were the standardized arms of a professional fighting force, all made possible by state-controlled workshops that produced them in vast quantities. A pharaoh's ability to launch military campaigns into Nubia or the Levant depended entirely on his supply of copper to equip his soldiers. The metal that built the temples was the same metal that conquered enemies, two sides of the same coin of absolute power. So when you look at a simple copper chisel in a museum, do not see just a tool, see the backbone of an empire, see the miners toiling in desert pits, the smelters tending blazing furnaces, and the countless workers shaping a civilization. That unassuming piece of metal represents a logistical triumph, a system of control so complete that it could redirect the flow of an entire nation's resources toward a single, impossible goal. The age of copper set a precedent that would echo for millennia, proving that whoever commands the source of technology commands the future itself, but copper has a hidden weakness, a softness that limits its potential. The next chapter in this story introduces a strange and dangerous material that solved this problem, a mysterious alloy known as arsenical copper. Long before the Egyptians mastered tin bronze, their artifacts were being made from a harder, superior metal. Scientific analysis reveals that many early Egyptian tools and weapons contain a surprising ingredient, arsenic. When a small amount of arsenic is added to copper during the smelting process, it fundamentally changes the metal. The resulting alloy is significantly harder, meaning it can hold a sharper edge for far longer. It also becomes more fluid when molten, making it much easier to cast into intricate shapes. This was a monumental improvement, but it presents us with a profound historical puzzle. Was this a deliberate innovation, a calculated recipe followed by ancient smiths, or was it simply a lucky accident? The answer is shrouded in the desert sands. One compelling theory suggests it was an unintentional benefit. The copper ores mined in the eastern desert were often naturally contaminated with arsenic minerals. A smith working with these specific ores would have unknowingly produced a harder, better metal without understanding why. The result was a superior product born from geological chance. Yet, the consistency with which we find arsenical copper in high-status objects hints at something more. Perhaps these master craftsmen, through generations of meticulous observation, began to recognize that ores from certain locations yielded a stronger final product. They may have actively sought out these specific, poisonous rocks, developing a kind of empirical science long before they understood the chemistry involved. This innovation, whether deliberate or accidental, came at a terrifying human cost. The process of smelting arsenic-rich ores would have released toxic fumes. The smiths breathing in these vapors would have suffered from a debilitating condition known then as metal fume fever. They experienced violent chills, intense muscle aches, and severe damage to their nervous systems. Every time they fired a furnace to create this wondrous metal, they were literally risking their lives. the proof of their dangerous craft survives in stunning artifacts. One of the most famous examples comes from the tomb of Queen Hetepheres I, the mother of Pharaoh Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid. Her burial equipment included a small, exquisite casket containing a set of copper tools. Modern analysis shows these were not made of pure copper, but of arsenical copper. These were not the tools of a common laborer, they were the prized possessions of royalty, made from the finest, most advanced material available. This suggests that for a time, this enigmatic alloy was a premium technology, a state secret that gave the early pyramid builders a critical edge, so the mystery remains. Were these ancient artisans brilliant chemists who discovered the first recipe for supercharged copper, or were they simply the beneficiaries of a deadly geological lottery? Either way, their work with this poisonous metal represents a crucial and perilous step on the path to true metallurgical mastery. Yet while copper built the state and arsenical bronze gave it an edge, one metal defined the soul of Egypt itself. Gold was not merely a precious substance, it was the divine flesh of the gods, a sliver of the eternal sun made solid on earth. The Egyptians believed gold was indestructible, its incorruptible shine a perfect symbol for life everlasting. This sacred metal pulsed at the very heart of their religion and royalty, and the lengths they went to acquire it were nothing short of monumental. To secure this divine material, Egypt launched vast mining expeditions into the harsh, sun-scorched landscapes of Nubia and the eastern desert. At places like Wadi Hammamat, you can still see the scars of this ancient industry carved into the mountainsides. These were not simple surface scratches, they were organized, industrial operations. Thousands of workers and prisoners of war toiled in these remote quarries, enduring brutal heat to follow the veins of gold-bearing quartz deep into the rock. Their methods were ingeniously adapted to the land itself. In river valleys, they panned for alluvial gold, swirling gravel and water in wide, shallow pans to let the heavier gold flakes settle out, a technique still used by prospectors today. But where the gold was locked within solid stone, they undertook the far more demanding task of hard rock mining. Using heavy stone mauls and fire-hardened wooden wedges, they would heat the rock face with fire, then douse it with water, causing it to crack. They would then painstakingly pound out the quartz veins with stone hammers and copper chisels, following the precious seam wherever it led, often into dangerous, unstable tunnels. Once the ore was extracted, the real transformation began. Back in the royal workshops, master craftsmen employed a skill that seems almost impossible. They learned to hammer raw gold into astonishingly thin sheets, thinner than a modern piece of paper. This delicate foil, known as gold leaf, was then meticulously applied to statues of deities, to the coffins of pharaohs, and to the sacred furniture that filled their tombs. The goal was not to create a solid, heavy object, but to make wood and stone appear as if they were made of pure, radiant divinity. A gilded statue in a dark temple, catching the light from a single oil lamp, would have seemed to glow with its own internal power, a literal embodiment of a god on earth. This was the ultimate purpose of Egyptian goldworking. It was a sacred craft, a technological miracle performed in service of the eternal. Every shimmering artifact, from a pharaoh's death mask to the sandals on a statue's feet, was a deliberate act of creation, an attempt to build a bridge between the mortal world and the everlasting realm of the gods. But to transform this sacred metal into objects of divine beauty required a level of artistry that defies belief. The Egyptian goldsmith was both an engineer and an alchemist, wielding fire and hammer to perform what seemed like miracles. Their first and most fundamental technique was the creation of sheet gold. Starting with a small, solid ingot, a craftsman would spend countless hours patiently hammering it on a smooth, hard stone anvil. With each precise, repetitive strike, the metal would spread, becoming wider and thinner. until it was transformed into a sheet of breathtaking delicacy. This was not a rushed process. A single sheet large enough to cover a coffin or a statue could be thinner than a human hair, a shimmering second skin of the sun god himself. For more complex, three-dimensional shapes like rings, amulets, or the figures of gods, they mastered a technique known as lost wax casting. It began with a sculptor who would carve the desired object in meticulous detail out of beeswax. This wax model was then enclosed in a clay mold and placed in a fire. The heat would melt the wax, which would drain out through a small channel, leaving behind a perfect hollow cavity within the hardened clay. Molten gold was then poured into this empty space, filling every minute crevice that the wax once occupied. Once the metal cooled, the clay mold was broken away, revealing a solid gold replica of the original wax sculpture. It was a method of perfect transference, of turning something temporary and fragile into a permanent, divine object, yet the pinnacle of their skill is seen in the almost impossibly fine decorative work. They developed techniques called granulation and filigree to adorn their creations with intricate patterns. Granulation involved creating tiny spheres of gold, each one perfectly formed, and then using a mysterious organic glue and carefully applied heat to solder them onto a gold background in stunning geometric or floral designs. Filigree used delicate wires of gold, twisted and curled into elegant spirals and frameworks. To solder such minute components without melting them required a control over temperature that seems to border on the supernatural. Nowhere is this mastery more evident than in the treasures of the boy King Tutankhamun. His solid gold death mask is the most famous artifact, but look closer at the pieces found with it. His magnificent pectorals, the broad necklaces that rested on his chest, are vast canvases of symbolic storytelling. One spectacular example shows a winged scarab made from a single piece of translucent yellow chalcedony, but its wings are crafted from brilliantly inlaid gold, lapis lazuli, and carnelian. Every feather is defined by tiny gold cloisons, or cells, filled with precisely cut stones. Another pectoral features a vulture with wings outstretched, each feather meticulously rendered through a combination of gold sheet, inlay, and delicate granulation. To hold such a piece in your hands would be to feel the weight of an entire universe of skill, patience, and sacred purpose. These were not merely items of jewelry, they were portable temples, each one a frozen hymn crafted in gold. Yet within this world of divine gold, a far greater rarity existed. In the earliest periods of Egypt, silver was a treasure more precious and elusive than gold itself. This seems counterintuitive, but the reason is rooted in pure geology. Egypt's deserts were rich in gold, but they held almost no native silver deposits. This meant that for centuries, nearly all the silver in Egypt had to come from somewhere else, arriving through long-distance trade or as plunder from foreign lands. This extreme scarcity transformed silver into the ultimate symbol of exotic power and distant connections. The silver that did find its way into royal treasuries was often not pure. Most early Egyptian artifacts we label as silver are actually crafted from electrum, a stunning natural alloy of gold and silver that has a pale, luminous glow. This material was sometimes called white gold, and it possessed a unique, otherworldly beauty. Because it occurred naturally in certain gold deposits, it was more readily available to Egyptian craftsmen than pure silver, yet it still carried that aura of the rare and the foreign. So where did this precious metal originate? The evidence points north, across the Mediterranean. The likely sources were the mines of the Aegean in places like ancient Greece, or even farther, in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Acquiring it required maintaining vast and fragile trade networks, a testament to a pharaoh's reach and influence. A single shipment of silver was not just a delivery of metal, it was a message: proof that the king's power extended beyond the horizon. This immense value is perfectly captured in a single, breathtaking discovery from the tomb of Queen Hetepheres I, the same queen with the arsenical copper tools. Archaeologists recovered a set of bracelets. They are inlaid with butterflies, their wings crafted from turquoise, lapis lazuli, and carnelian, but the setting for these jewels is not gold, it is silver. The mere existence of these bracelets speaks volumes. For a queen of the 4th dynasty, at the peak of the pyramid building age, to be buried with silver jewelry meant she was adorned with the most exclusive material in the known world. The craftsmanship is flawless, the design elegant, but its true power lies in its substance, to where silver was to display a connection to distant, almost mythical lands. It was a metal that whispered of secret trade routes and alliances with peoples from beyond the sea. In a civilization that measured wealth in divine symbolism, silver represented something different, a tangible piece of a world far wider than the Nile Valley. This divine fusion of sun and moon was made manifest in a single, breathtaking material. Electrum, the natural alloy of gold and silver, was more than just a precious metal to the Egyptians. It was a cosmological statement, a tangible piece of their universe. Its warm, pale glow perfectly embodied the union of solar and lunar power, the radiant gold of the sun god Ra seamlessly blended with the cool, shimmering silver of the moon. This was not merely an attractive metal, it was a sacred substance that captured the very balance of the heavens. Its most spectacular application crowned the greatest structures ever built. The very apex of a pyramid, the final, crucial stone known as the pyramidion, was often sheathed in electrum. Imagine the sight of a completed pyramid, its polished white limestone casing stones blazing under the sun, and at its peak, a capstone of this brilliant alloy. It would have caught the first and last light of each day, flashing like a beacon across the Nile Valley, a constant reminder of the pharaoh's divine connection to the celestial realm. This same material was used to tip the towering obelisks that stood before temple gateways, turning them into colossal needles of captured light. On a more personal scale, electrum was the preferred metal for objects of immense royal and religious importance. The funerary furniture of kings, the ceremonial vessels used in temple rituals, and the most powerful amulets were all fashioned from this solar-lunar alloy. A pharaoh buried with electrum artifacts was armed with the essence of both day and night, prepared for every phase of the eternal journey. Yet for all its divine symbolism, electrum presented the royal smiths with a formidable, earthly challenge. Because it is a natural alloy, its composition was never consistent. One nugget might contain 80% gold, yielding a rich, warm yellow hue, while the next might be 60% silver, creating a much paler, almost white metal. This variability meant its working properties were entirely unpredictable. A smith never knew if the metal he was about to hammer would be soft and malleable like pure gold, or suddenly become hard and brittle due to a higher silver content. It could crack under the hammer or behave in unexpected ways during casting. Mastering electrum required not just skill, but an almost intuitive feel for the material, a lifetime of experience in reading the metal's unique character with each and every strike. The creation of a perfect electrum pyramidion was therefore a triumph of both faith and metallurgy. It was a testament to craftsmen who could wrestle a capricious gift from the earth and shape it into a symbol of cosmic perfection, a challenge that makes their flawless finished products all the more extraordinary. The shimmering age of gold and electrum was built upon a hidden vulnerability. For all its sacred beauty, the copper and arsenical bronze that powered the state had reached its limits. Then, around 2,000 years before the Common Era, a quiet revolution arrived from beyond the horizon, a revolution named for a humble, gray metal, tin. The creation of true tin bronze, an alloy of roughly 90% copper and 10% tin, marked a technological leap that would define the prosperity of Egypt's Middle Kingdom. The advantages were immediate and profound. Bronze was significantly harder than copper, and it held a razor-sharp edge through far more use. This meant swords that did not bend in battle and tools that did not dull after a single day of quarrying. Perhaps just as importantly, bronze was far easier to cast than copper. When molten, it flows like water, filling the most intricate molds to create objects of stunning complexity and strength. This new material did not just make better tools, it enabled entirely new forms of art, industry, and warfare. Yet this revolutionary alloy presents us with one of the greatest logistical puzzles of the ancient world. Egypt had vast resources of copper, but it possessed virtually no native tin. So, where did this essential ingredient come from? The answer reveals an Egypt far more connected to the wider world than we once believed. The tin had to be imported through vast, fragile trade networks that stretched across continents. One compelling theory points to the distant mountains of Afghanistan, a region known to have ancient tin mines. Another suggests sources in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. The most astonishing possibility lies even farther west, in the misty islands of Cornwall, at the very edge of the known world. Imagine the journey, a lump of unremarkable gray ore mined in Cornwall, traveling by ship and by caravan, passing through countless hands across thousands of miles, all to reach the workshops of Thebes. This was not a simple exchange of goods, it was the lifeblood of a technological empire. The arrival of consistent tin supplies did not just change the composition of metal, it changed the balance of power. It allowed for the mass production of superior weapons that secured the borders and the efficient tools that built the monumental works of the Middle Kingdom. The story of Egyptian bronze is therefore a story of globalism in antiquity, a testament to the fact that even the most powerful civilization depends on a web of connections stretching to the farthest corners of the earth. This mastery of alloys would mean nothing without an equally revolutionary method of shaping them. The Egyptians perfected a technique of breathtaking ingenuity, a process known today as the lost wax method. It allowed them to create objects of impossible complexity, from the delicate limbs of a goddess to the hollow body of a sacred cat. The journey of a single bronze statue began not with metal, but with a ball of beeswax. A master sculptor would carefully warm the wax in his hands, then begin to shape it with simple tools made of wood and bone. He would carve the fine features of a pharaoh's face, the intricate pleats of a royal kilt, or the powerful muscles of a striding god. Every detail, down to the toenails and the lines on the palms, was rendered in this soft, temporary medium. This wax model was the statue's true soul, a perfect prototype in a material that could be easily corrected and refined. Once the wax model was complete, the act of transformation began. The sculptor would encase his delicate creation in a thick, custom-made clay paste. He would build this clay shell layer by layer, ensuring it captured every single contour of the wax beneath. This was not a rushed process. The outer clay mold had to be strong enough to withstand immense heat, yet fine enough to preserve the sharpness of every line. Small clay channels were inserted, creating pathways leading from the outside of the mold into the hollow space around the wax. The entire assembly was then left to dry, hardening into a seemingly unremarkable lump of clay. Then came the moment of magic. The clay mold was placed into a fiery furnace. As the temperature rose, the incredible would happen inside that sealed clay shell. The wax model would not just soften, it would completely melt. It would turn to liquid and pour out through the channels that had been prepared for it, draining away entirely. Where there was once a solid wax statue, there was now a perfect, empty cavity, a negative space holding the exact shape of the original sculpture. All that remained was the hardened, empty mold. Now, with the mold still hot, the smiths would pour the molten bronze. The glowing liquid metal would rush in, filling that empty space, flowing through every narrow channel and into the most minute details of the face, the fingers, and the hieroglyphs inscribed on the base. The metal filled the void the wax had left behind, a perfect substitution of the eternal for the temporary. After the metal cooled and solidified, the final act was one of destruction. The craftsman would take hammers and carefully break away the outer clay mold. This was a moment of tremendous anticipation, for it revealed the birth of the metal statue within. The rough casting was then cleaned, polished, and often inlaid with precious stones or glass to bring the deity or pharaoh to life. This technique was a secret weapon for creating large, hollow statues that were both lightweight and structurally sound. Some of the most stunning surviving bronzes, like the elegant statue of the goddess Karamama, are masterpieces of this method. Her slender form, adorned with intricate feather patterns and hieroglyphs, could never have been carved from a solid block of metal. It was the lost wax process that gave her that graceful, hollow lightness, allowing her to seem as if she might step off her pedestal and walk away. Through this brilliant multi-step ritual, the Egyptians achieved the ultimate goal of their craft. They had found a way to make the most durable materials perfectly capture the most fleeting human artistry, freezing a moment of divine inspiration in eternal metal. And yet, for all their mastery of alloys, the Egyptians faced a metal that resisted their understanding for centuries. This was the great iron dilemma. Long before they learned to smelt it from terrestrial ore, iron existed in their world as a metal that literally fell from the heavens. The earliest and most precious iron artifacts from ancient Egypt were crafted not from mined rock, but from meteorites. These were fragments of iron-nickel alloy that had traveled across the cosmos to land in the desert, and to the Egyptians, they were nothing less than divine gifts. When a blacksmith received a lump of this rare, otherworldly material, he knew he was handling something sacred, a piece of the sky itself. The most stunning proof of this sits in the Cairo Museum, recovered from the tomb of the boy King Tutankhamun. It is a beautiful and lethal dagger, its blade as bright and untarnished as the day it was placed in the pharaoh's wrappings over 3,000 years ago. The hilt is exquisitely crafted from gold, with a crystal pommel and intricate banding, but the true marvel is the metal of the blade itself. For decades, its perfect preservation was a mystery until modern science provided the answer. Using non-invasive X-ray fluorescence analysis, researchers were able to determine the blade's precise elemental composition. The results were definitive. The iron contained high percentages of nickel and cobalt, a signature chemical profile that matches known iron meteorites and is entirely distinct from terrestrial iron. This was the final scientific confirmation that King Tut was buried with a dagger forged from a fallen star. To the Egyptian mind, this made perfect symbolic sense. The gods lived in the sky, and a metal that descended from their realm was inherently sacred, a physical link to the divine. This celestial origin made meteoritic iron more valuable than gold, reserved for the most powerful amulets and the personal weapons of kings. It was a material that commanded both awe and reverence. Why, then, did it take so long for iron to become commonplace? The answer lies in the immense technological challenge. Smelting iron from its terrestrial ores requires a furnace temperature several hundred degrees hotter than what was needed for copper or bronze. It is a far more complex chemical process, and the initial result is not liquid metal, but a spongy mass of iron and slag called a bloom, which then requires repeated heating and hammering to purify. For a civilization with a perfectly functional bronze technology, the immense effort required to produce this new, unfamiliar metal simply was not worth it for a very long time. It was not until the late period, under the influence of foreign empires and with the knowledge of advanced smelting techniques spreading across the Mediterranean, that iron finally began to replace bronze as the primary metal for tools and weapons. So the story of iron in Egypt is a tale of two metals. First came the divine iron from the stars, a metal of kings and gods. Only much later came the practical iron from the earth, a metal of empire and industry, forever changing the world that the bronze smiths had built. Step inside the smoky, sweltering heart of the workshop. This was the true engine room of Egyptian civilization, a place where raw earth was transformed into divine power. The air was thick with the smell of burning charcoal and hot metal, a haze that stung the eyes and coated the lungs. Every sense was assaulted by the work, from the constant, rhythmic pounding to the intense, shimmering heat radiating from the furnace. The tools themselves were deceptively simple, but each one was perfectly adapted to its task. The center of all activity was the anvil, often just a large, smooth, heavy block of hard stone set firmly into the ground. It was upon this unyielding surface that every artifact, from a humble fishhook to a royal scepter, was born. In the smith's hand was his most essential partner, the hammer. Early hammers were simply rounded stones chosen for their durability, but as time went on, they were replaced by cast copper or bronze ones, their weight and balance carefully calibrated for the work. To hold the searing hot metal, the smith used tongs, a brilliantly simple tool that was little more than two metal rods hinged together with a rivet, giving him an extension of his own hand to manipulate the glowing object without being burned. And for the fine work, for carving details or cutting sheets, there was an array of chisels, their sharp copper or bronze tips driven by precise strikes from a wooden mallet. But the soul of the workshop was its furnace. This was not a massive industrial structure, but a carefully crafted clay-lined pit or a small, cylindrical shaft furnace made from mud brick. Its design was pure efficiency, concentrating and retaining the intense heat needed to melt metal. The true secret to reaching those critical temperatures, however, lay not in the furnace itself, but in the lungs that gave it life. These were the bellows. Picture a worker, perhaps an apprentice, rhythmically operating a pair of bellows made from the complete skins of goats or sheep. These skins were sewn shut, with a clay nozzle inserted into one end and a simple valve on the other. The operator would hold one in each hand or press them with his feet, pushing the air out of the nozzle and into the base of the furnace, then pulling them open to refill them. It was a constant, exhausting rhythm, a deep, whooshing breath that fanned the charcoal into a white, hot blaze. The sound of this breathing furnace, the clang of hammer on anvil, and the hiss of hot metal being quenched in water created the chaotic symphony of creation. In this unassuming, soot-blackened space, surrounded by simple tools, the artisans of Egypt performed their daily miracles, coaxing form from formlessness and turning stone into the very substance of gods and kings. But the Egyptian metalsmiths' work was not finished when the final shape emerged from the mold. They possessed a hidden art, a chemical knowledge that allowed them to paint with fire and transform a metal's very skin. This was the sophisticated science of patination, where they deliberately manipulated surfaces to create a rainbow of permanent colors and to protect their creations from the ravages of time. A freshly cast copper or bronze statue gleamed with a bright, reddish gold hue, a color the Egyptians associated with common, unrefined metal. For objects of high status or religious importance, this was often not the desired final appearance. Through a carefully controlled process, they could turn that surface a deep, lustrous black or a rich, chocolate brown, colors that mimic the appearance of far rarer and more valuable materials. A blackened bronze could be made to resemble precious black basalt stone, while a rich brown patina might imitate the costly imported ebony wood. This was not deception, it was alchemy, elevating a common alloy to the visual realm of the exotic and the divine. How did they achieve this magical transformation? The methods were as ingenious as they were simple. One technique involved the use of organic acids. A statue might be coated with a paste made from common substances like sour milk, vinegar, or even fruit pulp, all of which contain mild acids. The object was then gently heated, allowing the acid to react with the copper in the alloy. This chemical reaction created a thin, stable layer of copper oxide or copper sulfide on the surface, which appeared as a beautiful, durable black coating. Another method relied on heat alone. By carefully heating the metal in a reducing atmosphere, a fire starved of oxygen, and then quickly quenching it in water or an organic solution, they could force the metal to develop a range of colors from deep brown to a bluish black. This required an incredible feel for the fire's character, knowing exactly when to pull the piece to achieve the perfect shade. The result was not just a cosmetic change. This artificially created patina, this hard skin of corrosion, served a vital protective purpose. It shielded the more vulnerable metal underneath from the elements, drastically slowing down the natural, destructive corrosion process. We see this mastery on surviving statues of deities and pharaohs. The famous seated statue of the goddess Sekhmet, for instance, often displays a deep, uniform black patina that was almost certainly applied intentionally. This dark surface would have made the lion-headed goddess appear more formidable, carved from a single piece of night itself. Elaborate ritual vessels, meant to hold offerings in the temple, were also treated this way. Their darkened surfaces were not signs of age, but of the sacred craft that made them suitable for the gods. This deliberate coloring reveals a profound truth about these ancient artisans. They were not just makers of things, they were masters of material science. They understood that a metal's true potential lay not only in its hidden strength, but in the infinite possibilities of its surface, a canvas they learned to paint with chemistry, fire, and a visionary sense of art. These invisible bonds were the final, crucial secret to their masterpieces. While a single cast statue was a marvel, the true test of a metalsmith's skill came when separate pieces of metal had to be joined seamlessly, as if they had grown together. The Egyptians perfected two distinct methods for this, techniques we now call hard soldering and soft soldering. Each was a chemical and thermal dance chosen for the task at hand. Hard soldering was the premium technique, reserved for joining gold and high-quality silver. It used a special solder made from an alloy of copper and silver, a material that had a melting point just lower than the pieces being joined. This was the ultimate balancing act. The entire object was carefully heated, bringing the gold components to a glowing, near-liquid state. At the precise moment, the craftsman would apply the solder, which would melt and flow like water into the microscopic gap between the parts, drawn in by capillary action. When it cooled, the bond was as strong as the original metal itself, a permanent, molecular-level weld. For less delicate work, like joining copper or bronze, they used soft soldering. This method employed a solder made from a lead-tin alloy, a material with a much lower melting point. It was easier to work with but created a weaker joint, making it ideal for items that would not face significant stress, such as sealing the seams of containers or attaching non-structural elements. The true key to both techniques was the control of fire. To direct heat with surgical precision, the smith used a simple yet brilliant tool, the blowpipe. This was a long, hollow tube, often made of reed or metal. The craftsman would place the tip of the pipe just inches from the joint he was working on and blow a steady, focused stream of air onto the hot charcoal embers held nearby. His breath became a tool, a concentrated flamethrower that could heat a pinhead-sized area to the exact temperature needed without damaging the surrounding delicate work. This breath-controlled heat allowed for miracles of microengineering. Look at a magnified view of a royal necklace from a pharaoh's tomb. What appears as a solid, fluid form to the naked eye reveals its true nature under a macro lens. You can see the joins, but they are so perfectly executed, so clean and tight, that they are virtually invisible. The seam where a clasp was attached, the point where a golden wire was fused into a spiral, these are not crude welds but testaments to a hand that could command fire with the steadiness of a surgeon's scalpel. This technical mastery scaled from the microscopic to the monumental. The same principles that held together the tiniest granule on a queen's ring were used to assemble massive bronze gates for a temple. Large statues were often cast in separate sections, a leg, an arm, a torso, each perfected in its own mold. These heavy bronze pieces were then meticulously aligned and soldered together, creating a single, towering figure that appeared to have been cast in one impossible pour. Without this knowledge of invisible bonds, the great works of Egyptian art would have remained a collection of beautiful but disconnected parts. It was the smith's breath and his understanding of the hidden flow of metal that unified them, turning scattered pieces of gold and bronze into the eternal, seamless forms we marvel at today. That final blinding cap of electrum represented a problem of almost impossible scale. The pyramidion itself was a small masterpiece, a solid or sheathed metal point that could weigh hundreds of pounds. But its destination was the summit of a single piece of granite that might be 100 feet tall and weigh over 300 tons. How do you lift a delicate, priceless object to such a dizzying height and then place it with perfect precision on a narrow, polished stone tip, all without scratching the metal or toppling the entire monument? This was the ultimate test of their engineering nerve. One prevailing theory involves the construction of a massive earthen ramp built at the same time as the obelisk's pedestal. This ramp would have spiraled upwards, encircling the rising stone needle, providing a steady, sloping roadway for workers to ascend, but dragging a heavy, fragile metal cap up a ramp of sand and timber presents its own dangers. A single slip could send it tumbling, destroying months of painstaking work. Perhaps they used a different approach, one based on a temporary cage of wooden scaffolding that encased the obelisk's peak. This wooden framework would have created a stable working platform at the very top, a stage in the sky where craftsmen could carefully maneuver the pyramidion into its final, sacred position. The method of lifting remains just as debated. They lacked modern cranes, but they possessed an intimate understanding of leverage and counterweights. It is possible they employed a system of heavy ropes, wooden pulleys, and frames, using teams of laborers to slowly, inch by inch, winch the precious burden skyward. Imagine the tension in the air, the creak of ropes, the shouted commands, as that glittering point ascended, catching the sun and flashing like a signal to the gods. The final act of seating the pyramidion was the most delicate. The base of the metal cap and the top of the granite obelisk were not flat. They were engineered with a mortise and tenon joint, a stone tongue, and a metal groove that had to align perfectly. An error of even a few finger widths would mean failure. This was not just a construction project, it was a ritual. The moment the electrum cap clicked into place, the obelisk was transformed. It was no longer just a block of stone. It became a charged object, a conduit between the earth and the sun, its gleaming tip a permanent echo of the first ray of dawn. The successful placement of that pyramidion was a declaration that human ingenuity could, for a moment, touch the divine. The silence of the desert was broken by the sounds of an army, but this was an army of industry. Far from the lush banks of the Nile, in the scorching, barren mountains of the eastern desert and the Sinai, the true cost of Egypt's gleaming metal was paid. The pharaohs dispatched colossal, state-run expeditions into this unforgiving wilderness, organized with military precision. A single mission could involve thousands of men, a mobile city on the march. At its heart were the miners, skilled laborers who knew how to raid the rock. They were protected by units of soldiers, for the desert was lawless and the cargo was priceless. And overseeing it all were the scribes, the accountants of the empire, who meticulously recorded every basket of ore, every ration of water and bread, on their papyrus scrolls. This was not a matter of a few prospectors with picks. It was a full-scale industrial invasion of one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The conditions these men endured were almost beyond comprehension. They lived in temporary camps of stone huts and tents, exposed to a relentless sun by day and freezing temperatures by night. Water was more precious than the copper they sought, and every drop had to be carried in by donkey or rationed from distant, unreliable wells. The work itself was brutally physical. Using heavy stone mauls and copper chisels, they would pound at the rock face for hours, following a thin, green vein of copper ore deep into the mountainside. The air in the tunnels would be thick with dust, a fine, choking powder that coated their lungs. Every day was a battle against the mountain, the heat, and their own exhaustion. Yet they left their mark. At remote sites like Sarabit el Khadim in the Sinai, you can still see their voices echoing across the millennia. Carved into the cliff faces are inscriptions and stelae, prayers to the gods and records of their successful missions. One might read, the mining expedition of the scribe user achieved 3,000 units of copper. They did this not for fame, but to say, we were here. We endured. These carvings are the human face of this vast, impersonal operation, a personal signature on an epic struggle. Once the ore was wrestled from the earth, the next monumental challenge began, transporting it home. Tons of heavy, raw rock had to be moved hundreds of miles. Donkey caravans, sometimes hundreds of animals strong, were the lifeline. These sturdy creatures would be loaded with sacks of ore, forming a slow, dusty procession snaking through the wadis. They would trek to predetermined points on the Red Sea coast or to the nearest branch of the Nile, where the ore was transferred to waiting cargo boats. The final leg of the journey was by water, the heavy-laden ships sailing up the river, bringing the lifeblood of the state back to the royal workshops of Memphis and Thebes. Each gleaming copper statue began its life as a mountain of crushed rock, hauled across the desert by the sweat and will of countless forgotten men. So, who were the hands that performed these daily miracles? The evidence reveals a complex social picture, one that defies simple labels like slave or artisan. In the rigid hierarchy of ancient Egypt, the master metalworker occupied a unique and paradoxical space. He was part scientist, part priest, and a vital state asset all at once. Tomb paintings from the elite, such as those in the tomb of the vizier Rikmeyer at Thebes, offer a stunning window into their world. These detailed scenes show organized workshops bustling with activity. We see men working in teams, each with a specialized role. One smith operates the bellows, another tends the furnace, while a master craftsman hammers a glowing ingot on an anvil. This is not the work of isolated laborers, but of a coordinated, state-sponsored industry. The very fact that such scenes were deemed worthy of decoration in the tomb of a high official speaks volumes. They were not hidden away, they were celebrated as a cornerstone of the nation's wealth and power. The organization was meticulous, often under the direct control of the temple or the royal palace. These artisans were likely attached to major institutions, receiving rations of food, clothing, and housing in exchange for their exclusive service. They were not free in the modern sense, but neither were they slaves. They were more like highly valued civil servants, their skills so crucial that the state ensured their well-being to guarantee their output. But there is a deeper layer to their status, one that touches on the spiritual. The act of transforming dull, lifeless rock into a shining, divine object was seen as a form of magic, a parallel to the god's own act of creation. The metalworker, in his fiery workshop, was reenacting a cosmic process. This imbued his craft with a sacred quality, suggesting that the most skilled masters may have held a semi-priestly status. They were the keepers of a powerful, dangerous secret, the secret of transubstantiation. This reverence, however, had sharp limits. For all their skill, they remained part of the laboring class. The archaeological record tells another story as well. At the workers' village at Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, we find a different reality. These were highly skilled stone carvers and draftsmen, and their community enjoyed a remarkable degree of autonomy, even staging what might be the first recorded labor strike in history over delayed rations. While we have less direct evidence for metal workers in such a village, the parallel is telling. Skilled craftsmen could attain a comfortable life and social standing, but they were always tethered to the state that fed them. So the metal worker stands at a fascinating crossroads. He was a respected artisan whose work was immortalized on tomb walls, a practical chemist who wielded what seemed like divine power, and yet a servant whose life was dictated by the needs of Pharaoh and God. He was both the engine of empire and a cog within it, a man who touched the divine with his hands while his feet remained firmly planted in the dust of the workshop. But here we step onto speculative ground where history meets a tantalizing mystery. A strange artifact was unearthed near Baghdad, a clay jar dating to the Parthian period, containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod, all sealed with asphalt. When filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar, it produces a small electrical charge. Though not Egyptian, this so-called Baghdad battery introduces a radical question. Could ancient civilizations have understood the principles of electricity? This leads us to a peculiar puzzle within Egyptology itself. Certain fine gold objects from ancient Egypt, particularly some of the most delicate funerary ornaments, show traces of silver on their surfaces in patterns that seem too precise for simple alloying. Conversely, some silver objects appear to have been subtly gilded with gold. For proponents of the ancient electricity theory, this is potential evidence of an early form of electroplating. The idea is that the Egyptians might have used a primitive galvanic cell, perhaps similar in principle to the Baghdad jar, to deposit a thin layer of one metal onto another. The process would involve using a natural electrolyte, like grape juice, and a small electric current to bond gold or silver atoms to an object. The result would be a flawless, molecular-level coating, a feat incredibly difficult to achieve by any other method with the tools we traditionally attribute to them. Mainstream archaeology, however, views this with deep skepticism. The scientific consensus argues that the traces of different metals can be explained by far more conventional techniques. One is depletion gilding, a sophisticated process where a gold alloy object is repeatedly heated and treated with acidic salts. This treatment dissolves the copper or silver from the surface layer, leaving behind a skin of pure, rich gold. The underlying metal, now exposed by time or wear, could then show through, creating the illusion of plating. Another explanation is the use of finely powdered metals mixed with a binder and heat fused to the surface, a kind of ancient metallurgical paint. No wires or batteries have ever been found in an Egyptian archaeological context, and the electrical theory remains firmly on the fringe, yet the mystery persists, inviting us to wonder. Did a handful of anonymous geniuses in the royal workshops stumble upon a secret that would not be rediscovered for millennia? Were they not just masters of fire and hammer, but of currents we cannot yet prove they understood? The evidence is ambiguous, but the question itself challenges us to reconsider the limits of their legendary ingenuity. The secrets of Egyptian metalwork are no longer locked within the artifacts themselves. Today, we are cracking them open with beams of light and streams of electrons, using tools that act as microscopic time machines. X-ray fluorescence, often called XRF, is one of the most powerful of these tools. It works by firing a harmless, focused X-ray beam at an object. The atoms in the metal become momentarily excited and respond by emitting their own unique fluorescent signature, a kind of elemental fingerprint. By reading this signature, scientists can determine the exact recipe of the alloy without so much as scratching the surface. They can measure the percentages of copper, tin, arsenic, gold, and silver with astonishing precision, revealing the ancient smith's precise formula. This is how we confirmed the celestial origin of King Tutankhamun's iron dagger, identifying its high nickel content as the unmistakable mark of a meteorite. But XRF only tells us what the metal is made of. To understand how it was made, we turn to an even more powerful instrument, the scanning electron microscope, or SEM. This device allows us to peer into the metal's soul, magnifying its structure thousands of times. We can see the microscopic crystals that formed as the hot metal cooled, their size and shape telling us exactly how fast it was quenched. We can spot tiny inclusions of slag, the rocky waste from smelting, which reveal the quality of the original ore and the skill of the furnace master. Most importantly, we can examine the tool marks and wear patterns at a cellular level, distinguishing between a blade that was cast in a mold, hammered on an anvil, or carefully annealed with heat to remove stresses. These technologies are constantly challenging our assumptions. For years, we believed that the beautiful black surfaces on many bronze statues were simply the result of natural aging, a patina created by centuries in the tomb. But SEM analysis has revealed something far more deliberate. On statues of powerful deities like Sekhmet, we can now see that the black coating is a uniform, chemically altered layer, intentionally created through a controlled reaction with heat and organic acids. This was not decay, it was a final artistic choice, a sacred alchemy meant to mimic precious black stone. Another case study revolves around a simple copper chisel found at a pyramid site. Using elemental mapping, scientists can trace the lead impurities within the copper back to a specific mine in the Sinai, confirming the pharaoh's control over that distant resource. They can also see the crystalline structure of the metal at the chisel's edge, revealing that it was work hardened by repeated hammering, then repeatedly sharpened until it was worn down to a stub. This single, discarded tool tells a complete story of state logistics, daily labor, and the relentless consumption of resources that built a civilization. Every time we point one of these devices at an ancient artifact, we are not just analyzing metal, we are reading a lost language of craftsmanship, one elemental signature at a time, forcing us to constantly rewrite the history of human ingenuity. That same metal that built the pyramids was forged into the weapons that carved an empire. The story of Egyptian military power is written in the evolution of its arms, a direct reflection of their growing mastery over metal. The most iconic of these was the khopesh, a weapon that began as a simple, curved copper blade. Early versions were little more than exaggerated hooks, effective for hacking and pulling an enemy off balance. But as the arsenical copper and then true bronze alloys became available, the khopesh transformed. By the time of the New Kingdom's imperial expansion, it had become a lethal sickle sword of cast bronze, perfectly balanced for slashing. Its unique curved shape concentrated the force of a swing into a single, devastating point of impact, capable of shearing through bone and wooden shields. This was not a tool for common soldiers, but the signature weapon of the elite, a symbol of pharaonic authority that was as much a status symbol as it was an instrument of war. Yet the khopesh was only one part of a broader military revolution, one powered by a new technology that thundered across the battlefield. The war chariot, introduced around the same time as tin bronze, changed everything. This was the superweapon of its day, a platform of speed and terror that turned the Egyptian army into an unstoppable force. Its construction was a marvel of lightweight engineering, but its true strength depended on metal. The axle fittings, the critical points that bore the immense stress of high-speed turns, were reinforced with tough bronze castings. These components had to be strong enough to withstand the shock of uneven ground, yet light enough not to bog down the horses. Without these precise bronze parts, the chariot's revolutionary mobility would have been impossible, and the men who rode these chariots were protected by a new kind of armor, one made from hundreds of small, overlapping bronze scales. Each scale was a thin, hammered rectangle of bronze, pierced with holes and sewn onto a leather tunic. Imagine the sight of a regiment of charioteers, their scaled armor catching the sun, creating a shimmering, metallic skin that could deflect arrows and glancing blows. This was mass-produced defense, a testament to workshops that could stamp out and assemble thousands of these identical metal plates. The combination of the bronze-tipped arrow, the bronze khopesh, and the bronze-reinforced chariot created a tactical system that dominated the ancient world. A pharaoh's ability to project power into Syria or Nubia was no longer just a question of brave soldiers, but of a sophisticated industrial base that could equip them with the best technology on Earth. The empire was not just won by courage, it was forged in bronze. This spiritual dimension transformed the metalsmith's workshop into a sacred space. Every piece of hammered gold or cast bronze destined for a temple was not merely an object of art, it was a potential home for a god. The Egyptians believed that specific metals resonated with the essence of specific deities, creating a divine chemistry that powered their rituals. Gold, with its incorruptible solar glow, was the flesh of the sun god Ra. A statue plated in gold was not a symbol of the god, it was a physical body that Ra could inhabit, a point of contact between heaven and earth. Silver, far rarer and cooler in its shimmer, was sacred to the moon god Khonsu. Its pale light mirrored the moon's journey across the night sky, and objects made from it were infused with his mysterious, cyclical power, and the iron that fell from the stars, that celestial metal, was linked to Nut, the vast sky goddess whose star-studded body arched over the world. A dagger made from meteoritic iron was a sliver of the goddess herself. This belief came to life in the temple's most sacred objects. The divine statue residing in the inner sanctum was the focal point of this energy. Crafted from wood but sheathed in gold leaf, its eyes often inlaid with rock crystal and obsidian, this figure was more than an idol. During elaborate consecration rituals known as the opening of the mouth, priests used ceremonial tools to symbolically awaken the statue. They believed they were animating it, turning it into a true vessel, a receptacle for the god's spirit. The metal was not a decoration, it was the divine skin that made this miracle possible. Similarly, the ceremonial barks, the small, model boats used to carry the god's statue in festival processions, were gleaming testaments to this faith. Their hulls were often covered in gold foil, and their sacred shrines were adorned with electrum and silver, making the entire vessel a radiant, moving piece of the heavens. As priests carried this shimmering craft through the streets, the crowd wasn't just seeing a model boat, they were witnessing their god traveling in a sun bark, just as Ra sailed across the sky. The sound of worship was also shaped by metal. The sistrum, a ritual rattle, was a key instrument in temple music. Its U-shaped frame and metal discs, often made of bronze or even precious silver, produced a shimmering, rustling sound when shaken. This was not mere music, it was a sound believed to appease the gods, particularly the goddess Hathor. The metallic rustle was a sacred noise that drove away chaos and invited divine harmony into the world. In the quiet of the temple, surrounded by the scent of incense and the glint of metal, the boundary between material and spiritual dissolved. A golden statue was Ra. A silver amulet was Khonsu, A fragment of iron was the body of Nut. The metalsmith, through his craft, did not just create beautiful things, he built the very houses where the gods could dwell. Yet the sheer perfection of these stone behemoths confronts us with an unsettling question. Could the simple copper tools we credit to the Egyptians truly have built them? Mainstream archaeology points to the use of copper chisels and saws, aided by an abrasive slurry of sand and water. This theory suggests that the relentless grinding of quartz particles, a material harder than copper, did the actual cutting. In theory, it works. A team of workers could have sawed through a granite block by dragging a copper blade back and forth, feeding the abrasive mix into the cut for days or even weeks. But when we look at the evidence left on the stones themselves, the picture becomes far less clear. Some of the saw marks found on granite are incredibly narrow, almost impossibly so for a thick copper blade that would have been worn down rapidly by the abrasive. Even more puzzling are the drill holes. Cores extracted from deep within granite blocks show spiral grooves that are uniform and precise, as if the drill bit plunged through the solid rock with a steady, constant pressure that a hand-powered tool struggles to explain. This level of efficiency and precision on such an immense scale challenges our understanding of their capabilities. This has led to alternative theories, some quite compelling. Perhaps the Egyptians possessed a lost knowledge of metallurgy, creating a hardened copper alloy that we have not yet identified. Maybe they treated their tools through a secret process of work hardening and annealing that gave the copper a temporary, exceptional toughness. Other ideas venture into the use of different, more efficient techniques altogether. Could they have employed some form of chemical weakening, applying a natural solvent to the stone to soften it before cutting? The mystery deepens when we consider the logistics. To dress the millions of blocks for the Great Pyramid alone would have required an unimaginable number of copper tools, each one blunted and replaced after a remarkably short period of use. The industrial output needed just to keep the quarries supplied with sharp tools would have been a monumental feat in itself, a hidden industry operating in the shadow of the grand construction. So we are left with a choice. Do we accept the established theory with all its logistical puzzles, or do we allow for the possibility that a key piece of the technological puzzle has been lost to time? The pyramids stand as a permanent challenge, their silent stones guarding the secret of the hands that built them. This sacred purpose for metal reached its ultimate expression not in the temples of the living, but in the tombs of the dead. The Egyptians crafted their funerary equipment with one unshakable goal: to guarantee the deceased's safe passage and transformation into an eternal, divine being. At the heart of this practice was the belief that specific metals, especially gold, possessed an incorruptible magic. A body encased in gold was not merely being honored, it was being given the immortal flesh of the gods themselves. The most famous example is, of course, the solid gold death mask of Tutankhamun, but this was not just a portrait, it was a new, divine face for the king, a permanent vessel for his spirit that would never decay. His inner coffins were also made of solid gold, hammered and sculpted into the likeness of the boy pharaoh holding the crook and flail, his body entirely sheathed in the brilliance of the sun god. This was the ultimate protection, a literal fortress of divinity built to shield his soul for all time. Perhaps the most intimate and telling use of metal in this funerary magic involves the canopic jars. These were the 4 containers responsible for safeguarding the deceased's internal organs after mummification. While the jars themselves were often made of beautiful stone like alabaster, their lids were frequently fashioned from hammered gold or silver. Each lid was meticulously shaped into the head of one of the 4 sons of Horus, the deities charged with protecting a specific organ. Seti, with a human head, guarded the liver. Hapi, the baboon-headed god, watched over the lungs. Dumutef, with the head of a jackal, protected the stomach, and Quebesenuf, the falcon-headed god, kept the intestines safe. To seal these vital organs inside jars capped with the faces of gods, and to have those divine faces crafted from sacred, eternal metal, was a profound act of faith. It was a declaration that even the most vulnerable parts of the human body could be transformed and protected through the alchemy of belief and craftsmanship. The presence of a silver lid was just as significant as one of gold. In the context of the afterlife, silver's cool, luminous shine associated the organs with the moon and the night, the domain through which the sun god Ra traveled before being reborn at dawn. By using both solar gold and lunar silver, the Egyptians were creating a microcosm of the entire cosmic cycle within the tomb itself. Every material choice was a deliberate step in a spiritual recipe for immortality. The metal did not just adorn the ritual, it actively powered it, forming a perfect, indestructible bridge between the fragile world of the flesh and the everlasting realm of the spirit. Even the most brilliant flame will eventually flicker. The great empires of the New Kingdom, which had forged their power in bronze and gold, could not last forever. As Egypt's central authority weakened, its borders became porous, and new powers began to exert their influence, each leaving a distinct mark on the ancient craft of metalworking. The first to rise were the Libyans, warriors from the west who had long served as mercenaries in the Egyptian army. When they eventually seized the throne, they brought with them a taste for bold, heavy jewelry. Their style favored massive gold armlets and broad collars, often decorated with granulation that was coarser, more pronounced than the delicate Egyptian work. They did not seek to erase Egyptian tradition, but to augment it with their own aesthetic, creating pieces that spoke of martial strength and a new, hybrid identity. Following them, the Nubian pharaohs of the 25th dynasty arrived from the south, from a land Egypt had once colonized for its gold. These kings held Egyptian culture in the highest esteem, presenting themselves as the true restorers of its ancient glory. Under their rule, there was a deliberate and beautiful archaism in metalwork. Craftsmen looked back to the styles of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, reviving classic forms of jewelry and statuary. A Nubian pharaoh might be depicted in a solid gold shabti figure, but his distinct facial features and the double uraeus on his brow proudly proclaimed his southern origins. This was not mere imitation, it was a conscious fusion, a declaration that the soul of Egypt now resided south of Thebes. Then came the storm from the east. The Assyrian conquest was a brutal, shattering event, but it was the subsequent Persian takeover that truly wove Egypt into a vast international web. The Persian Empire stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, and it demanded a universal artistic language to bind its diverse subjects together. Egyptian goldsmiths and bronze workers suddenly found their skills in service to a foreign king. They were compelled to adopt the styles of the imperial court, creating rhytons, the ceremonial drinking vessels shaped like animal heads, and incorporating motifs like the Persian court hero slaying a beast. Yet the Persians were pragmatists. They recognized the unparalleled skill of the Egyptian workshops and had no desire to dismantle them. Instead, they harnessed this expertise for their own glorification. The result was a remarkable synthesis. You might find a traditional Egyptian god like Bes, the protector of the household, crafted in a purely Egyptian style, but his face bears the stylized curls of a Persian noble. A ceremonial axe might have the classic shape of a pharaoh's weapon, but its gold inlay depicts a griffin from Mesopotamian mythology. The conquests had transformed Egyptian metalworking from an isolated, sacred tradition into a cosmopolitan craft. The core techniques honed over 3 millennia, the lost wax casting, the delicate granulation, the art of patination, were not lost. They were simply applied to new forms for new masters. In a profound and unexpected way, the subjugation of Egypt ensured that its metallurgical genius would be carried far beyond the Nile, absorbed into the artistic bloodstream of the ancient world, and preserved for the future. From the patient hammering of a simple copper bead to the cosmic origins of a king's iron dagger, this was a journey of relentless innovation. The Egyptians mastered a process that was simultaneously a hard science, a delicate art, and a sacred ritual. They began by unlocking metal from stone, then learned to strengthen it with poisonous arsenic, and later connected with distant lands to create the revolutionary alloy of bronze. They painted with fire to create permanent colors and breathed life into molten metal through the lost wax cast. They hammered the flesh of the sun god into divine skin for statues and sealed the organs of the dead in jars capped with silver deities. This was far more than a craft. It was a complete integration of technology, beauty, and faith, a discipline where every strike of the hammer served both an earthly king and an eternal god. The legacy of these master smiths is all around us, embedded in the very fabric of our modern world. The next time you look at a piece of jewelry or a modern tool, remember the ancient Egyptian smiths whose forgotten secrets laid the foundation for our metal world. What other lost knowledge might be waiting to be rediscovered beneath the sands of time? Share your own thoughts on these enduring mysteries in the comments below, and subscribe for more deep dives into the secrets of our ancient past.